The Caddie at Birchwood. The pro shop was empty, except for two young men behind the counter, and they thought no one could hear them. Outside, the Arizona sun was hammering down on the fairways of Birchwood National, one of the most exclusive private golf clubs in the hills above Stale. Inside, the air conditioning hummed. A card reader beeped somewhere, and Trevor Kane leaned close to Colton Reed and lowered his voice. "If Mr. Sterling's Rolex goes missing," Trevor said, "and then it just happens to turn up in the old man's locker, the board won't have a choice. They'll have to fire him. Today, no questions." Colton glanced toward the door. "You sure? What if a member sticks up for him?" Trevor let out a short laugh. "Sticks up for a broke caddy who's 100 years old? Come on, nobody's going to believe some washed-up locker room ghost over the two of us. We've got clean records." "He's got nothing." He tapped the counter. "Once he's gone, I bring in my cousin as head caddy. Every big tip off the VIP members, we split it right down the middle. Easy money. Forever." Colton grinned. They bumped fists. Just two guys planning what felt, to them, like a harmless little favor to themselves. But at the far end of the shop, near the window, a man they had never once looked at stood very still. He was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and faded shorts, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. For 2 straight days he had been drifting around this club, and not a single person had glanced at him twice. He looked like a nobody, a middling weekend hacker who'd wandered in off the range. He set his water glass down on the counter, slowly. His hand closed around it until his knuckles went white. He had heard every word. There were 3 things those 2 young men did not know. Didn't know. They didn't know that the old caddy they were about to destroy had put more poor kids in front of a golf club than the 2 of them had years on this earth combined. They didn't know that the security cameras they believed had been broken for months had quietly been reinstalled 48 hours ago, wired for sound. And they had no idea that the quiet man at the end of the counter, the one nobody bothered to notice, was not a guest. Over the next 72 hours, everything in that clubhouse was going to come apart. And no one at Birchwood National would ever forget the day it did. To understand how it happened, we have to go back to that morning. The man came through the front gates of Birchwood a little after 7, when the dew was still burning off the greens. The valet didn't recognize him. The starter didn't recognize him. He liked it that way. He walked past the trophy wall in the main hall and stopped for just a second. There was a long brass plaque there, engraved with the names of every club champion going back years. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he owns, not something he's admiring for the first time. 12 years, he thought. 12 years, and this place has drifted so far from what he dreamed it could be. He didn't say who he was, not yet, but something in the way the man's jaw tightened told a story all its own. Because Adam Sandler didn't build Birchwood National to be a monument to rich men and their watches. He built it for someone, and that morning, walking those quiet halls in a stranger's disguise, he was starting to realize that whatever this club had become, it wasn't that. He got himself a spot near the caddy shack and just watched. That's when he first noticed Earl. Earl Grady moved slower than the young caddies. He was maybe 73, tall once but stooped now, with close-cropped white hair and hands that had clearly done a lifetime of work. His back gave him trouble. You could see it in the careful way he bent to line up a bag. The little pause before he straightened. Every so often, Hyde press a knuckle into his lower spine and breathe through it, and then keep going, like nothing happened. But here was the strange thing. Every member who walked past that caddy shack said the same word. "Morning, Earl." "Good to see you, Earl." "Earl, you old dog, you still out here?" And every single time, Earl had a smile for them, a real one. He knew their kids' names. He knew which one had a bad knee and which one had just had a grandbaby. He carried himself through all that heat and all that pain like a man who had somewhere he belonged. Around mid-morning, the man in the cap saw something that made him lean forward. A young golfer, a kid in his early 20s, came up to the range window looking embarrassed. He was dressed neat but cheap, the kind of clean that takes effort. He wanted a bucket of balls and a spot on the practice tee, and his card wouldn't go through. Colton, working the window, waved him off. Range time's for members and paying guests, man. Not a charity. The kid's face went red. He started to back away. And Earl, without a word, shuffled over, pulled a few worn bills out of his own pocket, and slid them across the counter. Put him on the far tee, Earl said quietly. He's got a good swing. Shame to waste it. The kid tried to argue. Earl just patted his shoulder. Pay it forward someday, son. That's how it's supposed to work. The man in the cap watched the whole thing. Then he watched Earl do it again, an hour later, this time for a little boy who was picking up balls on the range for tips and hadn't eaten. Earl bought him a sandwich from the snack cart out of his own pocket and told him to sit in the shade. The man in the cap finally spoke to a member sitting near him, an older gentleman named Hal Prescott, who'd clearly been coming to Birchwood for years. That Caddie, the man said, keeping his voice rough. What's his story? Hal set down his iced tea. Earl, best man on this property, and that's not close. He shook his head slowly. Lost his wife, Della, about 5 years back. Cancer. Ate through everything they had. House, savings, the car, all of it. Insurance wouldn't touch the treatment that might have helped her. He's still working at his age. He won't take a dime of charity. Too proud. Hal's voice dropped. Still sends money to the hospital every month to chip away at what's left of the bills. Says a debt's a debt, and an honest man pays what he owes. He looked over at Earl. Breaks my heart. Some of the things I hear the young ones say about him when they think he can't hear. The man in the cap didn't answer. He just watched Earl haul a heavy bag onto his shoulder, wince and walk it up the hill without a single word of complaint. By early afternoon, the club had emptied into that quiet lull between the morning and evening rounds. And that's when the man in the cap drifted into the pro shop, poured himself a water, and stood by the window. That's when he heard it, the whole plan. Trevor and Colton, heads together, laughing about the Rolex, about the locker, about the cousin and the tips. We already know what he heard. But knowing it now, after watching Earl buy a sandwich for a hungry kid, after hearing about Della and the bills and the pride, it hit the man in the cap like a fist to the chest. These two weren't just planning to steal. They were planning to take a good man, an old man who had already lost almost everything, and frame him for a crime to squeeze a few extra dollars out of the members' tips. He didn't confront them. Not yet. He had learned a long time ago that you don't win by shouting. You win by knowing more than the other guy. So when Earl clocked out that evening, an hour after his shift should have ended because he'd stayed to help clean the carts nobody else wanted to touch, the man in the cap followed him. Earl's truck was ancient, rust eating the wheel wells, one headlight taped up. It coughed to life and rattled out of the lot. The man followed at a distance, lights low, out past the manicured neighborhoods and down toward a stretch of dirt road, behind an old strip of warehouses. Earl parked beside a small trailer that had seen better decades. It leaned a little. A blue tarp covered one corner of the roof. 3 wooden steps that looked ready to give out. Earl climbed them slowly, pushed the stuck door open with his shoulder, and a single bulb flickered on inside. The man in the cap sat in his car in the dark for a long time. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, shame, because he was starting to understand that this old man had been suffering right under the roof of the very place he'd built to honor kindness, and he had never once noticed. The next day, the trap sprang. Mr. Sterling, a member with more money than sense, reported his Rolex missing from the men's locker room. Panic, a steward searching, and then, right on cue, Colton found it tucked in the back of a locker. Earl's locker. They brought him up to the main hall, where a dozen members were finishing lunch. Renee Coleman, the club manager, stood there looking sick to her stomach. She was a fair woman, but the evidence was the evidence. and she had two young employees swearing they'd seen Earl lurking near the lockers all morning. "Earl," she said, and her voice was shaking, "the watch was in your locker. There are witnesses. I don't have a choice here." The whole hall went silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Earl looked at the watch in the steward's hand. Then he looked at Renee, and the hurt in his eyes was the kind that comes only from betrayal, from being accused by a place you thought was home. He didn't shout. He didn't point at Trevor and Colton, though a flicker in his face said he understood exactly who had done this. He didn't beg. He just straightened his shoulders as best his old back would let him, and he said, very quietly, "I understand. I'll get my things." Trevor stepped forward, barely hiding his grin. "I'll walk him out to the gate." "That won't be necessary," said a voice from the back of the hall. The man in the wrinkled t-shirt stood up. He didn't slouch anymore. He straightened to his full height, reached up, and pulled off the cap. Somebody dropped a fork. It clattered on the tile, and nobody moved to pick it up. Because the weakened hacker nobody had bothered to look at for 2 whole days was Adam Sandler, and he wasn't a guest. He was the man who owned Birchwood National. "Mr. Sandler," Renee breathed, going pale. "I had no idea you were." "I know," he said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. That was the point. He walked to the center of the hall. From his pocket, he took a small remote and pointed it at the big television over the bar. "Renee mentioned the cameras have been down for months," he said. "Funny thing, I had new ones installed 2 days ago. Every angle, with sound." The screen came to life. There was Colton, lifting Mr. Sterling's Rolex from the locker room. There was Trevor, walking it down the row and tucking it into Earl's locker, glancing over his shoulder the whole way. And then there they were in the pro shop, heads together, and the audio came through crystal clear for the entire hall to hear. If Mr. Sterling's Rolex goes missing and then it just happens to turn up in the old man's locker, nobody's going to believe some washed-up locker room ghost over the two of us. The gasps went through the room like a wave. A member actually stood up out of his chair. Sandler let it play to the end, then clicked it off. He turned to the screen once more and brought up a second reel. This one was different. This one showed Earl, over and over, quietly slipping his own money across the range counter for a broke kid. Earl buying a sandwich for a boy in the shade. Earl staying an hour late to scrub carts nobody else would touch. "This," Sandler said, "is the man you were about to throw off my property in handcuffs." Trevor's face had gone gray. "Mr. Sandler, there's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." Sandler said it soft, and somehow that was worse than a shout. "Is that what you call stealing a man's watch, planting it, and lying to get an old man arrested so you could skim tips?" He took a step closer, and Trevor actually flinched back. "Do you know anything about him?" Sandler asked, nodding toward Earl. "Do you know he sold everything he owned to try to save his wife? That he still pays her hospital bills 5 years after she's gone? Because he thinks an honest man settles his debts? Do you know he lives in a trailer you wouldn't keep a dog in? And he still buys sandwiches for hungry kids out of his own pocket?" Trevor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Right on time, 2 police officers came through the front doors. Sandler had called them that morning and shown them the footage before the club even opened. They'd been waiting outside for his signal. Trevor Kane, Colton Reed. The lead officer's voice was flat. "You're both under arrest. Grand theft, conspiracy, and filing a false report." Trevor's arrogance shattered the second the cuffs clicked shut. "This isn't fair. It was a joke. We were going to put the watch back." "Tell it to the judge," the officer said. Colton had to be helped to his feet. He was crying now, mascara-less tears of pure panic. "My whole life is over. This wasn't supposed to happen." "Neither was framing an innocent man," Sandler said, "and there was no cruelty in it, only a cold, tired truth. Actions have consequences. That's a lesson you should have learned a long time ago." The whole hall watched through the windows as the two of them were folded into separate patrol cars. When it was quiet again, Sandler turned to Earl, who had stood through the entire thing, with his eyes bright and his back straight. "Earl," he said, "would you come talk with me a minute?" They went into the small office in the back. Sandler gestured for the old man to take the good chair. "I owe you an apology," Sandler said. 7 years you've been on this property. 7 years of doing right by everybody, and it took me putting on a disguise to even see you. That's on me." "No apology needed, Mr. Sandler," Earl said gently. "You couldn't have known. That's the thing." Sandler pulled a chair around so they were face to face. "I should have known. Because you're the reason I built this place, Earl. You just didn't know it." Earl frowned. "Sir? 12 years ago I built Birchwood to honor a man named Gus Hartley." The old man went very still. "Gus taught me how to swing a club at a beat-up muni course back when I had holes in my shoes and—" "Nobody would give me the time of day," Sandler said, his voice going rough. "He believed in me before there was any reason to, and when he was dying, he grabbed my hand and he made me promise something. He said, 'Look after Earl for me. Earl's the best friend I ever had, and he'll never ask a soul for help.'" Earl's eyes filled. "I said yes," Sandler went on, "and then I got busy. Movies, this club, 100 things. I never went looking because I told myself I wouldn't know where to start." He shook his head slowly. "And the whole time, Earl, you were right here, carrying bags up my hill, living in a trailer behind a warehouse. The man Gus asked me to protect, working for me, and I didn't even see your face." Earl wiped his eyes with the back of a weathered hand. "Gus talked about you, you know," he said quietly. "Right up to the end. Said the world was going to find out what he already knew. He was right about that, too." For a moment, neither man could speak. Then Sandler slid a folder across the desk. Earl opened it with trembling hands and read it twice, because the first time it didn't make sense. Head caddy and club ambassador. Full salary. Full medical. Hours he could actually manage. "I don't have management experience," Earl started. "You have something better," Sandler said. "You have the exact thing this club forgot it was supposed to be about. That can't be taught." He set down a second folder. Inside was the deed to a small, solid house 3 blocks from Birchwood. No mortgage, no rent. "That's 7 years of overdue bonuses," Sandler said, before Earl could protest. "And I called the hospital yesterday. Della's bills are paid. All of it. You don't owe them another cent." Earl put his hand over his mouth, and the tears came for real now, the quiet kind from a man who has been strong for far too long. "And I called your daughter," Sandler added, softly. "Tanya, in Atlanta. She's known something was wrong for years, Earl. She loves you. She told me to tell you that love isn't a burden, it's a privilege. The only weight you ever put on her was making her worry from 1,000 miles away." Earl couldn't answer. He just nodded, over and over, gripping the folder like it might float away. In the weeks that followed, Adam Sandler started a scholarship fund in the name of Gus Hartley to put golf clubs in the hands of kids who could never afford this place. The exact thing Earl had been doing quietly. Out of his own thin wallet for years, he rebuilt the way Birchwood treated its people, from the caddies to the kitchen, so that no one working under his roof would ever again have to choose between their dignity and a decent life. As for Trevor Kane and Colton Reed, the road ahead of them was long and hard. Grand theft was a serious charge, and the video left nothing to argue. They pleaded guilty. Probation, hundreds of hours of community service, full restitution, and a criminal record that followed them into every job interview for years. Their names ran in the county paper. Their families learned exactly who they'd become when they thought no one important was watching. But something else happened too. Months later, that mattered more than any of it. Colton wrote a letter. It came to the club in shaky handwriting, addressed to Earl. He didn't ask for anything. He just said he'd spent his community service hours at a shelter, serving food to people who had nothing, and that every single day he thought about the sandwich Earl bought for a hungry kid he didn't even know. He wrote that he finally understood the difference between them. That Earl gave when it cost him something, and that he, Colton, had spent his whole life taking when it cost him nothing. He wrote that he was sorry and that he was trying to become the kind of man Earl already was. Earl read the letter twice. Then he wrote back 3 words, "I forgive you, keep going." Because that was who he was. And somewhere in a small, solid house, 3 blocks from Birchwood National, Earl Grady woke every morning with a peace he hadn't felt since Della passed. He still got to the club early. He still knew every member by name. He still found quiet ways to help the ones who were struggling. Only now he did it as head caddy, with a roof that didn't leak and a debt that was finally paid. On his desk sat a photo of Della, smiling on the last good trip they ever took. And beside it, a note in Adam Sandler's own handwriting. It read, "The measure of a man isn't his money or his title. It's the kindness he shows when he thinks nobody important is watching. By that measure, Earl, you're the richest man I've ever known. And Gus, wherever you are, I kept my promise. It just took me a while to see him."